T'en dirais.
Ah,
On en parle après. Bonjour tout le monde, je vous présente Paul Bleau qui est avec moi pour le moment et il y a James DiEugenio qui va se joindre à nous dans une quinzaine de minutes. Paul, on s'est déjà parlé sur mon balado. Merci d'être avec moi ce matin, mais ce midi en fait. Avant de te présenter comme il faut, je vais juste faire un petit topo. Premièrement, aujourd'hui, on est le 22 novembre 2023, donc 60 ans après l'assassinat de John F. Kennedy. C'est pour ça qu'on a décidé de faire ça aujourd'hui, une entrevue spéciale sur 60 ans plus tard. Avant de commencer, je veux vous remercier à tout le monde, comme d'habitude, d'être là. Vous savez comment c'est important, votre soutien. Le simple fait de mettre un j'aime sur la vidéo, de partager, ça aide vraiment beaucoup dans l'algorithme. Vous pouvez aussi suivre mes plateformes. Je suis sur YouTube. En ce moment, on est en direct là, sur YouTube, X, Facebook. Je suis aussi disponible sur Instagram. Et je veux présenter mon commanditaire, c'est NordVPN. Pour ceux qui ne savent pas ce que c'est un VPN, vous pouvez aller sur YouTube où j'ai fait une vidéo explicative, mais en gros, ça protège vos données quand vous naviguez sur Internet. Ça vous permet aussi de brouiller votre adresse IP, de choisir l'adresse IP que vous prenez. Donc, vous pouvez choisir votre géolocalisation pour avoir accès à des contenus géorestreints. C'est le VPN le plus rapide sur le marché, un des mieux cotés par ses utilisateurs. Donc, si vous utilisez mon code promo au nordvpn.com/Elo Veut Savoir sans accent, vous allez avoir accès, dépendamment de ce que vous prenez comme forfait, vous pouvez avoir plusieurs mois gratuits. Donc, je répète, nordvpn.com/Elo Veut Savoir. Je vais le mettre dans le chat. nordvpn.com/Elo Veut Savoir pour ceux qui ont envie d'aller explorer. Bien entendu, vous n'êtes pas obligé de prendre un VPN si vous avez envie de supporter mon travail. Vous pouvez aussi prendre l'abonnement sur Facebook. C'est disponible depuis seulement une semaine. Vous allez sur la page Elo Veut Savoir, Facebook, et vous cliquez sur abonnement. Ça va vous donner des avantages. Je vais faire de plus en plus de contenu exclusif pour mes abonnés. Merci encore une fois d'être là. Et maintenant, parlons des choses sérieuses. Paul, vous avez sorti le 14 novembre un nouveau livre avec 5 auteurs. Ça s'appelle, je le nomme parce que le titre est en anglais, JFK Assassination Chokeholds That Proved There Was a Conspiracy. Écoute, premièrement, allô.
Allô.
Paul, je t'ai reçu ici il y a 1 an et demi.
Oui.
Tu étais venu chez moi, tu étais parti de Québec quand même. Je veux dire à tous ceux qui me suivent, c'est grâce à toi que j'ai pu rencontrer Olivier Stone. Je tiens vraiment à te saluer et te remercier infiniment pour ça. Donc, toi, tu as été dans le documentaire de Olivier Stone qui s'appelle JFK Revisited. Tu es comment on pourrait dire? Tu es un fan vraiment intense. On pourrait dire que tu es devenu un expert parce que tu as fait énormément de recherches sur la question de John F. Kennedy. Et qu'est-ce qui t'a amené donc à écrire ce livre-là? Pourquoi un autre livre sur la grande question de John F. Kennedy?
Oui, bonne question. Premièrement, je voulais te féliciter parce que l'entrevue que tu as faite avec James DiEugenio et Olivier Stone était remarquable. Merci. Et avait été soulignée par plusieurs des recherchistes. Les recherchistes qui suivent Olivier, Olivier, c'est quand même quelqu'un qui est assez particulier, si je peux dire.
Oui.
Mais il avait l'air vraiment heureux, enthousiasmé et j'ai rarement vu une entrevue sortir autant.
Merci. Même James a eu la gentillesse de dire que c'était une des meilleures entrevues, la meilleure entrevue que Olivier Stone avait faite. Ça m'a vraiment touché. Meilleure que Joe Rogan. J'étais, wow, attends.
et disons-le, là, je pense que tu étais dans le salon de chez Olivier Stone.
Il nous a reçus dans un espèce de studio study en anglais. Là, quand tu rentres, c'est comme la pièce à l'air de son bureau là, où il travaille. Il y avait tous le script de son livre qu'il a écrit à la main.
Ouais.
C'est là que j'étais. Je pense pas que c'était le salon, parce que le salon, il y avait de l'air un peu plus loin. Il y a plusieurs pièces dans sa maison. C'est pas un 4,5, là.
Mais il y a dû avoir un petit peu de pression sur le caméraman.
Ah oui, il était vraiment stressant. Je te l'avais dit, hein? Oui, non, il était vraiment...
Écoute, je n'irai pas trop là-dedans, mais félicitations.
Merci.
Sur le pourquoi de Chokeholds. C'est que, il faut que je retourne il y a environ 10 ans, quand j'ai écrit mon premier article pour James DiEugenio, que c'est extraordinaire, qu'on va l'avoir avec nous là, dans pas grand temps.
Il est en attente dans le chat, d'ailleurs. Je vais attendre avant de le faire.
Il
est déjà là.
Oh, c'est incroyable. Alors, écoute, Jim, à ce moment-là, moi, j'avais fait la première recherche sur comment les bouquins d'histoire relataient l'assassinat de JFK. Et j'ai même questionné les auteurs. Puis, dans environ 21 de ces bouquins-là, on suivait, c'est-à-dire on répétait un peu ce que disait la Warren Commission. La Warren Commission, ça a été la première enquête mise sur pied par le gouvernement pour regarder l'assassinat. Ils ont livré un rapport en 1964 et le rapport disait, bon, Oswald était un tueur solitaire et qu'il n'y avait pas de complot, essentiellement. Alors, ce que les livres relataient pas, c'est qu'il y a eu 5 enquêtes gouvernementaux depuis. Les enquêtes qui ont suivi ne disent absolument pas la même chose que la Warren Commission. Donc, l'année passée, j'ai été invité à un panel pour une conférence à Dallas et il voulait que je parle de cette étude-là. Et on avait fait un panel, puis on disait, ben, voyons, ça n'a pas de sens. Normalement, il y a un code de conduite pour écrire des bouquins d'histoire. Puis un des éléments, là, un des codes, c'est que on se doit d'évoluer avec de nouvelles informations. Alors, il n'y avait aucune évolution dans la pensée ou ce qui était écrit dans les livres d'histoire. Alors là, à un moment donné, on était 5 personnes. 4, excuse-moi. Jim, moi et 2 avocats. On va revenir sur l'aspect avocat, je pense.
Ouais, oui.
Où on a une discussion, puis il y a un des avocats qui disent ben, qu'est-ce que tu penses de telle preuve? En fait, il référait à une photo très suspecte de Oswald dans une cour où il tient 2 fusils.
Ouais.
Il y a des magazines. Bon, pour ceux qui regardent ça de près, ça a l'air à être une photo très truquée avec un genre qui disent une ligne, là, en anglais, on dit un crop line, là, mais une ligne là, qui superimpose le visage d'Oswald.
Qui donne l'impression, en fait, que le corps existe, mais que ça serait probablement pas Oswald qui était sur la photo à l'origine.
Ah, la réponse était, ben, ça a l'air très suspect. Moi, je ne crois pas que c'est une véritable photo, mais ça ne constitue pas une preuve irréfutable.
Ouais.
Alors, là, on s'est dit, mais c'est quoi les preuves irréfutables? Et on en a vite établi une dizaine. Il y a une dizaine de preuves, là, honnêtement, qu'on regarde. Puis on s'est dit, si j'avais à écrire de quoi, je focuserais seulement sur ce qui est irréfutable et non ce que des zones grises.
Ouais.
Alors, c'est de là, Héloïse, qu'on a eu le concept de chokeholds. Chokeholds en anglais, hein, c'est une espèce de prise qu'on peut imaginer dans la lutte qui est impossible de s'en sortir, sauf que ça a un double sens. C'est plutôt un chokehold d'argumentaire, c'est-à-dire on avance un argumentaire qui ne peut pas être disputé, selon nous. Okay. Alors, c'est là qu'on s'est mis ensemble. Moi, James, 2 avocats, puis il y a eu un troisième du Canada, un troisième avocat qui s'est joint à nous un peu plus tard. Et on a commencé à écrire un livre entourant les 10 chokeholds pour, dans le fond, dire voici ce qu'on va faire pour la 60e année. On va essayer de donner pour tout, parce que c'est très difficile à naviguer, hein, le dossier de l'assassinat JFK. C'est très difficile. Alors, si on donne de quoi sur les chokeholds, il faut imaginer presque un élève qui recevrait ce livre-là puis qui dirait à son prof oui, mais vous dites que le livre dit que Oswald était tueur solitaire. Pouvez-vous m'expliquer pourquoi celui qui a tué Oswald 48 heures plus tard, Jack Ruby, a reçu de l'aide pour descendre en bas pour être à proximité d'Oswald et que cet homme-là, Ruby, avait une tonne de contacts avec la mafia? Pouvez-vous m'expliquer ça? Alors, tu sais, c'est inexplicable. Puis, on a des exemples comme ça partout à travers le livre. Le côté vraiment extraordinaire, c'est que, pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas Jim, c'est probablement le chercheur le plus réputé dans le domaine au monde. Moi, je suis choyé de pouvoir collaborer avec lui sur toutes sortes de choses. Mais les 3 avocats qui se sont joints à nous, Ce qu'ils ont fait, c'est qu'ils ont pris la recherche que moi et Jim ont fait, et eux-mêmes, hein, ils connaissent le dossier, puis ils nous ont toujours posé la question, oui, mais est-ce que ce que vous dites atteint un standard de preuve? Puis un standard de preuve légal. Et c'est la première fois dans un livre, là, vraiment, où on met autant d'attention sur des standards de preuve. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire prépondérance de preuve? Il y a des standards de preuve pour le civil, il y a des standards de preuve pour le criminel, et ça fait partie du livre, et on peut voir ça à travers tous les chapitres.
Donc, si je comprends bien, le livre, dans le fond, c'est un essai où vous faites un peu comme si Oswald avait été en cours et finalement, comme quoi on aurait pu prouver hors de tout doute qu'il n'était pas l'assassin solitaire dans cette histoire-là. C'est comme pour le désinculper.
Ben, en fait, je te dirais, je répondrais un peu différemment. C'est qu'on prouve qu'il y aurait un doute raisonnable.
Okay? Un doute raisonnable que
un doute raisonnable. Ça ne veut pas dire qu'il n'y a aucune implication. Ça fait qu'on pourrait, par contre, que dire sur les preuves qui ont amené pour dire que c'était le tueur, je pense qu'on démontre qu'il y a énormément de problèmes avec les preuves qui ont été amenées contre Oswald. Mais plus important, c'est qu'on prouve qu'il y avait un complot.
Vous le prouvez.
On le démontre. On le démontre clairement. Et les avocats, c'est avec ces deux notions différentes, là.
Donc, il y a la notion légale là-dedans, c'est ce que je comprends? Puis,
oui.
L'autre notion, c'est quoi? C'est plus forensic? C'est quoi le mot?
Ben, en fait, si on regarde les standards, hein, de preuve pour amener quelqu'un à être coupable dans un dossier criminel, hein, ça veut dire qu'il peut être pendu, là, mis à mort, là. C'est que le niveau de preuve doit dépasser tout doute raisonnable. Ça veut dire une certitude à environ 98% de la culpabilité de la personne.
OK.
Par contre, que si on irait dans le civil, hein, mettons que toi et moi, on serait affrontés à une cause civile, je pourrais juste montrer que moi, j'ai plus de preuves que toi.
OK.
OK. Mais il y a quelque chose entre les deux. Mettons que moi, je voulais te faire discipliner, OK, et faire enlever tes licences pour pratiquer, mettons comme un médecin ou l'autre. Ça n'atteint pas le niveau du criminel, mais c'est beaucoup plus sévère que le civil. OK? Autrement dit, en anglais, il dit ça prend clear and convincing evidence. Clear and convincing, ça veut dire.
Clair et convaincant.
Clair et convaincant. Alors, nous, ce qu'on a fait, c'est qu'on a amené des preuves claires et convaincantes qu'il y avait complot. Ça fait que c'est nos deux objectifs, c'était de démontrer que Oswald n'aurait pas été trouvé coupable sans vraiment doute, qu'il y aurait eu doute raisonnable, plus que doute raisonnable, et qu'il y avait des preuves claires et convaincantes de complot et d'obstruction de justice. C'est les deux choses qu'on a démontrées.
OK, on va en parler avec Jim, justement. Je vais l'introduire. Donc, pour ceux qui nous suivent en ce moment, qui parlaient juste français, on va maintenant passer en anglais pour le reste de la discussion. Il y aura quand même une section de questions-réponses à la fin de l'entrevue. Donc, si vous voulez quand même rester, ce sera possible pour Paul à ce moment-là de répondre en français à vos questions. Mais comme on est en direct, il n'y a pas possibilité de faire une traduction instantanée. Puis Jim, étant un des plus grands experts sur la question de John F. Kennedy, j'étais contente de pouvoir le recevoir. Tu me disais tantôt, Paul, qu'elle est à Fox News aussi aujourd'hui.
Ah oui, normalement, il est passé à Fox News.
Quand même, c'est Fox News, Elo Veut Savoir. Fait que je vais ajouter tout de suite Jim. On va l'accueillir. Hey, Jim.
How you doing?
Good, yourself.
Okay, nice French lesson.
Good to see you.
Oh, you heard that.
So, for those who don't know you, we already introduced you. Paul gave you a very nice presentation, nice introduction. So, I met you before. We were in LA. That's where you live. So, thanks for being with us this morning. Today is a very special day. It's the 60th anniversary of JFK assassination. It's not a happy day, but I think it's important that we talk about it. There is something weird in the fact that 60 years later, there's still things to say about that. It's been a long ride for those who've been like you for many decades trying to shed the truth on what happened. We already talked about that, so I know you've been interested in this since I think the 80s. What is more to say? What happened? Like, and I saw you exactly a year ago, Paul. It was a year and a half ago. So, what happened in the last year that we could say is new in this topic?
Well, I don't know if you know about this up there, but what's kind of strange about this anniversary as opposed to the 50th anniversary is that it's not nearly as one-sided as the 50th anniversary. The 50th anniversary was just a blowout. Okay, the establishment made sure that no dissenting voices would get into the mainstream media. That's not the case this time around.
Okay.
All right. First of all, you have the Paul Landis book. Okay, I was just with him at Cyril Wex Pittsburgh,
Can you
Duquesne.
tell us about this book for those who are not familiar? What I think it was a very important book this year.
Landis was a Secret Service agent, and he was in Dallas on the day of the assassination. He cooperated with a co-writer to come out with this book. I think it's called The Final Witness or something like that. All right. And what he says in this book is that he picked up a projectile in the back of the limousine. All right. Up against the back seat of the limousine. All right. And then he brought it into Parkland Hospital and he deposited it on Kennedy's gurney. All right. Now, if Landis is telling the truth, then, well, it's obviously too many bullets.
There's a cover up.
Well, yes, you could look at it that way too. Yeah, there's too many bullets. There's a fourth bullet according to him.
Mm.
All right. And the Warren Commission has always said that there were only 3.
Right.
So that means that there was a second assassin.
And just to be clear, they said there was 3 because it was the only way that we could have the lone assassin theory. If there was more than 3 shots, it had to be more than 1 shooters.
Well, it's pretty hard to believe with 3, but that's what they said at the extremes. You know, Oswald could have gotten 3 shots off in around 6 seconds. All right. The other reason is that there were only 3 shells found at the so-called 6th floor sniper's nest window. So Landis kind of upsets the apple cart, you know, when he comes in with this fourth bullet. The other thing is there's this documentary playing on Paramount Plus called What the Doctors Saw. And I had actually seen this film a couple years ago when Oliver Stone and myself were putting together JFK Revisited. All right, what they've done is they've added a couple talking heads, one of them being Matt Crumpton, who was one of the contributors to the book that Paul and I worked on, all right, the JFK assassination chokeholds, and the other guy being Doug Horn, who worked for the review board, all right, and he and Jeremy Gunn worked on a new medical investigation. See, what these guys... And I guess he had a hard time selling it, but it was originally sold to CBS. Then Leslie Moonves got fired, okay, and they didn't put it on. So finally he sold it to a streamer, Paramount Plus. This film is very interesting for 2 reasons. First of all, it's finally out there now that more than one person saw an entrance hole into Kennedy's neck, which means that there was a shot from the front. All right. Okay. And several of these guys testify as to being puzzled by the autopsy photos because they recalled a large baseball-sized hole in the back of Kennedy's head. All right. Also, Dr. McClellan, and I remember this from the first time I saw the movie. said that after Malcolm, see, there was a press conference in Dallas that day. Kemp Clark, the head of neurosurgery, and Malcolm Perry, the doctor who did the tracheotomy on Kennedy's neck over the bullet wound. McClellan says that after Perry stopped speaking and started to walk off the podium, a well-dressed guy came up to him, grabbed him by the arm, and said, "Don't you ever say that again in public." Now, when I first saw this, it was at Bob Tannenbaum's house, because he's the other talking head. Bob Tannenbaum was the deputy counsel for the House Select Committee. All right. And I looked at him and I said, that was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Kennedy's pronounced dead like at about 1 o'clock. And Bob says they knew within the hour. Okay. They knew something was wrong within the hour.
Well, of
All right.
course.
Okay. Now, the third thing is from, I think, this Libby Laboratories. John Orr has put together a combination animation laser demonstration of the real trajectory of the single bullet theory. And it's not like what ABC did back in 2003. All right.
Which is?
So this is another destruction of the so-called magic bullet. Okay.
Yeah.
The trajectory of the magic bullet. See, in my essay in the Chokeholds book, I really didn't do a lot with that because I thought it's been so, so many times, so many different people, so many different theories. And because when I interviewed Henry Lee for JFK Revisited, okay, I met him at some restaurant in Malibu before we actually filmed him. I believe we filmed him in Dallas. And I asked him about this point. All right. And he said, "Jim, you can't do a trajectory analysis in the JFK case." And
Why?
I said, "Well, how come?" And he said, "Because look, neither wound was dissected. Unless you dissect a wound, you cannot speak with any authority about the trajectory through the body. All right. It's more or less just guesswork." And well, here I am sitting next to a guy who's certified in like 48 states to testify, 42 countries. He's done 1,000 gunshot wound examinations. I said, he must know, he probably knows what he's talking about. And so we decided not to do that in the film. But John Orr decided to go ahead and try and do it. And I have to say, from what I saw of it, it's kind of accurate. Okay, unlike the ABC one, which was really kind of a joke. All right. So see, these three things have actually gotten into the mainstream media.
Yeah, recently.
Yes. And this is why I'm saying that the 60th anniversary is not going to be a blowout, like the 50th one was.
Yeah, now there's a conversation. Yeah, Paul, do you want to say something?
Well, sorry, I just chime in just for your audience. If you think of what Jim is saying here, is there was an autopsy where they didn't dissect the wounds. I mean, if you can believe that, that was the most important autopsy of the last century.
And the wounds were not dissected.
They didn't dissect the brain, the headshot, and they didn't dissect the shot, the single bullet trajectory. So even the FBI in their first report never believed in the single bullet theory. They said that, they never said that there was a bullet that did what later on. That only came out, the single bullet theory, some 6 months
later,
maybe 5 months after the Warren Commission started, because they they were in a pickle because they had to come up with something, because it was later, acknowledged that a bystander had been touched by a bullet. Mm-hmm. Okay, so because that bystander was touched by a bullet, you could no longer have 3 bullets causing the wounds to Connolly and JFK. You could only have 2, and one of them causing 7 wounds. Okay, 7 wounds through Kennedy and Connolly, because what happens to Connolly's body? He's the governor who was sitting in front of Kennedy. He was seriously hurt, and hit also. So it became really a farce, this single bullet theory from the beginning. So I just wanted to point that important aspect. And then, you know, the other thing that Jim's referring to is you have to imagine that because Oswald's on the 6th floor, right, you have a shot that is going downwards and hits Kennedy near the shoulder blade. So then they have to explain a 25 to 40% descent, and then
a change in the angle.
Then it has to come back up to go through the throat, and then back down again to hit Conley where he was hit. So the trajectory, you know, as Jim says, I agree that if you don't do trajectory analysis, you know, in the wounds, it's hard to focus on that, but it just didn't make any sense.
Of course.
In the book, we have this belated quote by Arlen Specter, all right, the father of the single bullet theory, which Edward Epstein, who interviewed him many, many, many years ago, kept secret until this year, okay, when he brought out this new book. And Specter more or less said to Epstein, commenting on the single bullet theory, when he says, how did you convince the Warren Commission to go along with this? And Specter said, well, I told them, either we go with the single bullet theory or we have to look for a second assassin. And then, obviously, they were not going to start looking for a second assassin 5 months later. Okay.
Wow. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
So now you decided to write this book that just came out last week. Congratulations for your work. And so obviously I haven't read it because it just came out. It will be translated for those who speak French. So there is a big justice. You have 3 lawyers co-writing with you. So why was it, well, first of all, how justice was obstructed for 60 years, and why is it important to bring justice and the legal aspect in this book?
Paul, you wrote that, didn't you?
I wrote that chapter. I think that's one of there are 10 chapters, and the last one is called 60 Years of Obstruction of Justice.
Okay.
And I think it's a pretty unique, chapter. I don't think that it's ever been done before to this depth. So what we did with this chapter is to show how the Warren Commission was manipulated. They were receiving orders from the get-go that it was important to go with the single bullet as a single assassin, lone assassin scenario. And that's in memos that came out from the FBI and the Assistant Attorney General saying, we've got to convince the public that there was a lone assassin. That happens day one. And if you look at all the efforts that were done to, dismiss witnesses that were saying things that would demonstrate a conspiracy versus witnesses, and the shaky witnesses they used to put Oswald on the 6th floor. They're terrible witnesses. I mean, one guy claims...
In what term? Like, what do you mean by terrible witnesses?
Well, you have a guy who's, on the ground, and he's looking up, and he can only have a view of the 6th floor where you would see, Oswald from the waist up. Okay. And this guy is the person who's supposed to have made a description. That even the HSCA says it's impossible that this guy was able to recognize and point out what he did. So you had 2.
No, Paul.
Yeah.
Howard Brennan refused to testify.
Oh, did he now?
For the House Select Committee. Now, this is a very interesting story. First, they asked him to testify, and he said no. And then they said, well, we're going to have to subpoena you. If you subpoena me, I'm going to get a lawyer, and I'm going to fight the subpoena. All right. And then they said, well, what if we give you immunity? I still won't come. All right.
Who are
Howard Brennan is the Warren Commission star witness for Oswald being on the 6th floor.
Okay.
All right. And he refused to testify before the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
You can actually do that? You can refuse.
Well, he didn't testify, so I guess
guess you can.
They didn't want to arrest him, I guess. All right, because it would have been some very bad publicity,
right?
But he just would not testify. Period, for the House Select Committee.
So getting back to 60 years of obstruction of justice, well, we talked about the botched autopsy. The key thing during that autopsy is the 3 people who performed it had no experience in gunshot autopsy. They were selected because they were military doctors, and they were surrounded by generals and admirals during the autopsy in something that you would never see, right? A crowded autopsy room, and they were being told, don't do this, don't do that. And next thing you know, the Humes burns his notes. He has these notes, and he burns them, which is something you would never do before trial.
So Humes was one of the the scientists who did the autopsy. Am I correct?
Yeah, one of the pathologists, the doctors who one of 3. Okay, and that's, by the way, the Warren Commission is just plastered with. But then when you go through Garrison, the Garrison trial, what they did to that poor man, they bugged his office. Garrison is the one who organized a trial against one of the possible conspirators
in Louisiana.
And the U.S. government involved itself, as well as the CIA, to completely destroy his attempt and slander him. And now we go through all the investigations that were harmed or obstructed with, and we end, Eloise, with it accumulates to what is happening now. In other words, Donald Trump and Joe Biden were supposed to have declassified all the documents according to the JFK Act in 2017, and they broke the law. There's
didn't
no
do
other
it.
way of putting it. They broke the law. They did not declassify, and now there's a change in the law that has been put in where, hey, you know what? Those thousands of files that still aren't declassified, well, don't bother us with that anymore. We'll let the agencies determine when it's going to be safe for them to declassify them. So that's in complete breach of the law that took place in the early 1990s by the, that set up the ARRB, which was mandated to organize the declassification of all these documents. And the thing is every time stuff is declassified, we're finding new pieces of the puzzle. And it's just gotten worse and worse for those who want to believe the lone assassin scenario. So that's basically,
they want to believe, because at this point you really have to want to believe in this theory to
well, you really have to.
The latest poll, 65% don't. Okay, and of the people who don't, 17% think the CIA was behind it. It's one of the most bizarre splits that I think has come up with in contemporary history, where you have this schizoid kind of mentality where the only people who believe the single bullet theory and Oswald did it are the people at Time Magazine, okay, the people at CBS and etc. Whereas the mass of the public, does not believe it at all. And one of the things I believe that is many years ago, Kevin Phillips put up a graph in his book, Arrogant Capital, and he labeled it a study in cynicism. And it was the decline in belief of people in what their government was saying. When he did the last year, which I think was 1994 or something, an astonishing only 19% believed in what their government was saying. But in 1960, when Kennedy was inaugurated, it was 75%. Okay. The biggest single year drop was 1964 when the Warren Commission came out. That was the biggest single year drop on the graph.
So it says a lot, like people lost their trust in their own government.
Yes, yes.
And that brings me, I'm sorry to interrupt, that brings me to, I think, an important question, but what happened on that day when he was assassinated? Do you think that we're still in a continuum of what happened, whoever did this? Do you think, obviously a lot of people lost their trust in their government, so do you think that it shows that there is something wrong within our government still to this day?
I don't think there's any question about that. See, what the Kennedy assassination did, what that Magnus event did, that giant Uber event did, what that did is for the first time in modern history, people began to understand that all this hoopla about the White House, about Congress, about the Senate, about the House of Representatives, about the FBI, about the Supreme Court, they began to understand that this was just an image. Okay, this wasn't really what was going on.
It's like a theater.
Behind the scenes. There was a whole, whatever you want to call it, a shadow government that was really operating, which people like Chet Huntley and David Brinkley and Walter Cronkite and Howard K. Smith and all these other overpaid, master of ceremonies on the nightly news, that they didn't tell you about. They never told you about what was really going on. And so for the first time, this exploded into the consciousness of the American public. And then people like Mark Lane and people like Josiah Thompson and people like Harold Weisberg began, and these things sold. These books started really selling.
So those people you're naming are authors who...
Yeah, they're the authors of the first wave of books.
Right.
Okay. And so then this expanded until we finally found out many years later that the CIA had made a deal with organized crime to kill Fidel Castro. Okay. And that was really the linchpin to the exposure of just how bad the secret government really was. And and America has not been the same since.
Ever since.
Yeah.
And I think, of course, you're talking about your standpoint because you're American, but I think in the world, JFK is a very important figure because he was loved. He is still beloved to this day. And it feels like what happened on that day, we're still paying for today. And that's why I think we really want justice to be made. And we're hoping that those documents will be declassified and that a book, just like the one you wrote, is important even 60 years later. So is there something, for those who are very familiar with this topic, would you say that there is something new in this book that you managed to find an angle? What makes it different than any other book?
Well, I think there's more than one. Okay. But for instance, Paul's chapter on the dissidents throughout the investigations, the official investigations, there were many, many people who did not want to go along with the official story, but they did anyway. Okay, for the so-called good of the country. Okay, and he lists, God, there must be 40 of them. Okay, in that beginning chapter, like Richard Schweiker, like
90.
Oh, there's 90. There's that many.
90.
Oh my God. Okay, but they kept quiet for whatever reason. It's like, for instance, now we know that the Warren Commission was a minority report.
Right.
There was only 3 people who were try to say that it was really unanimous, but it really wasn't. Okay. Now, another point which I think is very important is the mystery of Kennedy's brain.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay. This is, I believe, one of the most startling things that has come out of late. Okay.
So it did come out lately. These are new documents that were unclassified?
the first official body to actually explore this issue was the ARB, okay? But there has been a lot of investigation since, okay? And there's a guy named Moskowitz who was interviewed by the ARB. His interview did not come out till years later.
When was the ARB?
It closed its doors in 98. But 98. This is what's important. A lot of their files were not declassified till later. They were on what they called a phased withdrawal. Okay. And so they would not be declassified until a certain year. But then we found out that even some of those were not declassified when they were supposed to be declassified. The Moskowitz interview, I didn't see until about, my God, a year ago. I think it had been declassified earlier, you know, but I don't know exactly when. But that he said, he was a Secret Service agent, all right? And he said he had evidence, he had seen evidence that Kennedy's brain was at Armed Forces Institute of Pathology with a label on it, okay?
Which means?
Which means the common myth is it was buried with the body. Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right. But, and then if you can believe it, the ARB found a second witness who said he had seen a jar with the very same label on it. All right. So
in a different place, or we're talking about
the same place, the AFIP, the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. So here we are in the new millennium trying to still find out, my God, where the heck is Kennedy's brain at? You know, but the bigger question is, why did there have to be so much subterfuge about this issue? And I believe, and I think most informed people believe, that the reason for this is that the last thing in the world they want to show you was the real Kennedy's brain the night it was taken out of his body, because it would have shown evidence of more than one bullet, and it would have been extremely damaged condition, not the kind of drawings and etc. and pictures that we have today. And in fact, in the chapter I did on this in the book, you know, John Stringer, the official autopsy photographer, when he was confronted with these pictures in front of the ARB, he walked over to the easel where they were at. He started studying them very closely. And he said, this is Ansco. This is Ansco film. I didn't use Ansco.
This is a like a trade, like a mark. What was it? Ansco?
No.
It's like Kodak.
Ansco is a brand of film.
A brand. Oh yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. I didn't use Ansco. I used Kodak. All right. And then he said, you see these numbers here in the lower right? This means that this is part of a press pack. It's done in series. Okay. That's why they're numbered. All right. I didn't use a press pack. Okay. I used duo folders. All right. And so then Jeremy Gunn says, are you ready to deny that you took these pictures? He said, if that's Ansco and if that's a press pack, I didn't take these pictures. All right. So this leads to the question, well, who did?
Who did?
Who did take the pictures, and why did there have to be another set of pictures?
I'm a little confused though, because in the documentary you did with Olivier Stone, there is like the way of the brain that would be too heavy and all that. So we know the way of the brain. So at some point, because you said that the myth was that he was buried with his brain, but at some point the brain came out and had a way. So I'm lost here. When did that happen?
No. See, they didn't discover that until like a week later. There was no brain weight recorded the night of the autopsy, which is one of the most bizarre things about the whole case. Why wasn't the brain weight recorded that night? It wasn't until what they call the supplementary autopsy, which I believe was on December 2nd, even more than a week, that they come up with this 1,500 grams. which is way, way too high, you know, especially under these circumstances. The
That you're
average,
supposed to be missing a part of your brain.
Yes.
oh yeah, yeah. The average brain weight is 1340. Okay. So this is 160 grams over what it should be. And everybody who's ever seen pictures of the Zapruder film, you can see Kennedy's head exploding right in front of you with the mist going up in the air. You can see the pictures of the back seat, the blood and tissue all over the back. You see Jackie Kennedy reaching out onto the trunk of the car, getting a piece of his brain, which, by the way, she did get it. And she gave it to a doctor at Parkland Hospital. You see the cyclist on the left side. Okay. He later said, I was hit so hard, I thought I was hit by a bullet. And he took a piece of Kennedy's brain out of his mouth. Okay. All right. So how on earth can this be 1,500 grams? How on earth can it weigh 1,500 grams? I truly believe today, after studying this case for 32, I'm almost crying. I wasted 32 years on
this. No, you haven't. It's a good thing we have you.
Yeah, after 32 years on this, I believe that this is the lighthouse in the mist, okay, of the secret to the Kennedy assassination.
Mm-hmm. Paul, do you want to add something?
Well, yeah, because you were wondering what's new in the book. So maybe a summary. I think the readers will be astonished to find out that Oswald was impersonated at least 20 times, okay, before the assassination.
Okay, so explain that.
Okay, so here you're supposed to have a lone nut, right? He's supposed to be just turned 24, high school education, having nothing to do with intelligence or whatnot. And yet there are at least 20 incidents where many witnesses came through and said, hey, we saw this guy. And during these incidents, Oswald was always acting unhinged. What I mean by unhinged, he was acting anti-Kennedy, violent, someone acting in a way that was certain to leave an impression on the people around him.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I'll give you one case. When he was supposed to allegedly have gone to Mexico City,
mm-hmm.
he is said to have met a guy in the Russian consulate, a Russian agent called Valery Kostakov. Who is Valery Kostakov? He's the head of assassinations for the Western Hemisphere. Now, why was that impersonation important? It was important because they wanted to leave a trace that Oswald was, involved with somebody who gives orders or plans assassinations, and that he was in cahoots with Castro and the Russians. That was the whole goal. But the problem is his discussions over the phone, or the person's discussions over the phone, were recorded. And when the recordings were overheard by the agents who were interrogating Oswald after the assassination, because Oswald was interrogated for something like 12 hours before he himself was assassinated, told
you have a record of that?
No.
Well, no.
There's only a very partial record of it.
They had no stenographer and no tape, if you can believe it. So, no.
That in itself is pretty incriminating.
But what you do have is a transcript from Hoover telling LBJ, Hoover, who was in charge of the FBI, telling Lyndon Johnson, hey, you know what? Our agents who are questioning Oswald, it's confusing because they listen to the recorded tapes and they say that the voice on the tape is not Oswald. And nor are the pictures that we have taken of the person who entered the Russian consulate. So there's a clear... Now, there are many other instances where you have imitations, like another time.
Why would they do that? Like,
it was to leave what they call a crumb trail leading to Oswald after the assassination, saying, hey, here's someone who was acting in a way that was very incriminating. Furthermore, what the plan was originally they didn't want to necessarily go the lone nut route, Eloise. The people organizing the crime were hoping to provide an excuse to the American government to reinvade the island. In other words, a lot of the imitations, in a lot of them, Oswald was with Cuban exiles. In one instance, he was at a shooting range, okay, practicing, and he was shooting on other people's target. One guy yelled at him, and he said, "Oh, geez, I thought it was firing at Kennedy," okay? He actually said that, and he was seen by 7 or 8 people doing that. The thing is the people with him were 2 Cuban exiles, one of whom was acting himself very, noisily to be seen, and he was dressed like Castro. He had a long beard, the hat, the fatigues. Okay, so that in a sense is probably what helped create the huge mess that they had to cover up afterwards when it was decided to go the lone nut route, because you couldn't have Oswald with Cuban exiles or seen in the company of escorts. So that's sort of, in that chapter, you're going to see at least 20 examples of where he's being impersonated.
And I think that's what you were talking about in the JFK documentary. That was you were brought to talk about the Oswald impersonations. Am I correct?
No, actually, what Paul did in the documentary is the previous plots to kill Kennedy. That's what he did.
Oh, yeah, true.
Matt Crumpton wrote the essay on the impersonations, and I agree with Paul. It's the most extensive collection of Oswald impersonations I think I've read any place. Okay, which
is Matt Crumpton a lawyer?
Yes.
Okay, so basically the lawyers in the book are Matt Crumpton, Andrew Eiler, and Mark Adam Chick.
Yeah, those are the 3 attorneys.
Okay,
and Andrew lives up there in Canada also. Okay, in Hamilton, and he did the whole standards of proof thing. Okay, which he showed that this is what's really bizarre about this case. Neither the Warren Commission nor the House Select Committee. And let me give Andrew a lot of credit for this, because I have never seen this done anywhere. And I've read literally hundreds of books on this case, and I've never seen this done anywhere. He proved that neither the House Select Committee nor the Warren Commission had any standard of evidence for what they accepted that would stand up in any court of law or any administrative court of law. Now, what makes this so bizarre is that these guys are lawyers. Like, all the Warren commissioners were lawyers. Alan Dulles was a longtime lawyer. John McCloy was a longtime lawyer.
He was a very corrupt lawyer. Very corrupt.
Gerald Ford was a lawyer. Okay. You go to the House Select Committee, Robert Blakey and Gary Cornwell, who ended up being the chief counsel, they were lawyers. Okay. So here we have 2 courts of law that are violating the very essence of legal standards in order to railroad Lee Harvey Oswald, who, by the way, never had an attorney in either case. And in fact, Mark Lane wanted to represent Oswald before the Warren Commission. He got a very polite letter back from J. Lee Rankin, who was the chief counsel for the Warren Commission, saying words of the effect that, "Dear Mr. Lane, thanks for your offer, but there's too many secret documents that we're going to handle that we can't let you see." That's really what he said.
That's the official answer. Wow.
And by the way, we're still not seeing them.
To this day.
2023, there's still 4,000 documents that are secret.
4,000. So were there a few of these documents that were unclassified lately, or just not at all?
No, there actually were some declassified. Not very many. Not very many. See, what Biden and Trump were doing.
Yeah.
And I believe this was very conscious. And we're very fortunate to have Mark and Andrew, because they've done the best work on these releases and the very slow pace. What they've done is they've played a shell game. What they've done is they'll release a document with maybe 2 words that are now not redacted, that were redacted, and they'll say that this is a new document. Or sometimes they'll release a document that has more redactions in it, and they'll say, does everybody know what redactions are? Do I have to explain that?
No, go ahead. Explain it.
A redaction is when you're reading a document and you'll see a black line through a sentence.
Caviardé en français.
Caviardé, right, good.
Okay. And in some cases, these redactions are very extensive. Okay, see, when the review board was in practice until 1998, they did not let these guys get away with this stuff. Okay, but ever since the review board has been terminated, they have been allowed to get away with this stuff. And let me tell you about the arrogance of these organizations. John Thunheim, who was the chairman of the ARB, described their first meeting with the CIA. And they put a document up on the screen and they said, look, we're going to declassify this whole thing without any redactions unless you give us a very good reason, okay, for us not to release it. And the CIA guy sat there, Thunheim said, for about 30 seconds. And he said, give me a couple of minutes. I'll think of something. Okay. See, this is what the FBI, when they went in, the FBI guy went in with his lawyer. Okay. And Thunheim told him the same thing. You know, we're going to declassify this document unless you give us a very good reason. We're not. And the FBI guy turns to the lawyer and he says, can they really do that? He said, yes, they can. See, this is what these guys had gotten away with for all these years until the ARB came around. They were just shocked at what was happening, you know.
Well, that's a question that's been asked in the chat. What are they trying to cover up, do you think? And why are they, like, 60 years later, everybody's gone? What are we protecting here? What are they protecting?
See, Jefferson Morley has done a lot of good work on this guy named Joanides, who was the guy running the Cuban exiles in New Orleans in the summer of 1963, and later lied about it to get on the House Select Committee. And he was one of the guys who, according to the people working on that committee, did a lot to sandbag the guys working on the Mexico City report, Dan Hardway and Eddie Lopez. And in fact, they told me that up until when he came in, they had pretty clear access to CIA documents. All right. When Joanides came in, all right, that all stopped. Okay. And he basically denied them documents, was very late getting documents there. According to Jeff Morley, in the summer of 1963, George Joanides got something called SI, which means special intelligence, from the CIA. All right. We don't know what that is. Can you believe this? In 2023, this guy who's running the Cuban exiles around Oswald got a special intelligence message from CIA, and we don't know what it is. All right. And Jeff thinks that it probably has to do with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. All right. And Paul has done some very, very good work on the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. All right. And it's very clear, I believe, from Paul's work that the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was being so dominated and so infiltrated by the CIA and the FBI that by 1963, it was a hollow shell of what it had been in 1961. All right. And so if you take a look at this, remember, Eloise, they told Oswald, don't open up a chapter in New Orleans. He did. Okay. Oswald then put 544 Camp Street on more than one flyer, which of course was the location of Guy Bannister's office. the guy he was working under in the summer of 1963, where David Ferrie was at more than once. All right. So, and here's a very interesting thing. One of the places that Oswald leafleted was Clay Shaw's International Trademark. Okay. That's what, and suddenly out of nowhere, all these press people come up to film and take pictures of Oswald and Shaw's trademark. All right. A week before that happened, Jesse Core, who was Clay Shaw's right-hand man at the International Trademark, picked up a flyer from Oswald on Canal Street. That flyer had 544 Camp Street on it. Jesse Core sent that to the FBI office with an arrow at the address. In other words, a week before he was to appear before the International Trademark, Jesse Core knew there was something wrong with this address of 544 Camp Street. So these are all the things that make this whole FPCC linkage with Oswald very, very, very suspicious. And I believe that George Joanides knew about it. Okay.
Paul, you want to add something?
Yeah, just for your audience, what Jim is pointing out here is one of the reasons you'd want to, avoid a deep investigation. In other words, Oswald had so many ties with right-wingers and intelligence. Now, the reason he probably started up the FPCC chapter was to help him become a provocateur and an informant, because anybody who would sign up to join the Fair Play for Cuba committee was a communist, and
Right.
he was providing names to probably Guy Bannister, and he's known. Look, I mean, when Oswald got into a little fight with one of the Cuban exiles, guess what he does? He's being jailed. He was arrested, and he's in New Orleans. He asks to talk to the FBI. Think about that. That would be like us calling, the Mounties for a little fight. And the FBI shows up, and he spent an hour and a half to 3 hours with him. Okay, what were they discussing?
We'll never know.
We'll never know, but it was obviously not the idea that someone was mean to him. Okay,
Right.
So the thing is with the Fair Play for Cuba committee, it was, completely infested with informants.
Right.
By 1963. So when you understand Oswald's activities, you understand that this isn't, someone who's acting on ideology there. He's acting on a mission. Okay, it's clearly a mission, just like when he went to Russia as a fake defector. That was under, it was a mission. So now what's he doing in New Orleans?
It's a mission.
It's another mission. So there's a chapter on that. I think we wrote it in a way that a seasoned researcher will say, "Oh, I didn't know that," and they'll find some new stuff. But I think it's written also in a way. I'm talking to people already who have read the book, and it's something that the normal population will be able to look into it and really get a good idea of what happened.
Right.
And so that's sort of the concept. We had
I put the link in the chat for those who are interested and are okay with reading in English. So it's on Amazon. I repeat the title. It's JFK Assassination Chokeholds That Proved There Was a Conspiracy. So it's very decently priced on Amazon. But that brings me back to that question, because I don't feel like you actually answered, both of you. But who did it and why, in your opinion?
I think most people who have studied it in depth would probably say that the Central Intelligence Agency was involved in moving around Oswald in the summer and fall of 1963.
There was some degree of implication from the CIA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then you had all of these military guys at the autopsy that night. Okay, all these Curtis LeMay.
But they were acting. Yeah, Curtis LeMay and all these people were hired by a government. They were not just there by themselves.
They actually thought they were the government. Okay?
Right, right.
All right. You know, all their disputes with Kennedy. We could spend another hour on that. All right. But Curtis LeMay is very interesting because he would not reply to his aide de camp.
So for those who don't know who that person is, what was his title at this moment when he flew from Canada?
He was in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, chairman of the Air Force.
Okay.
Okay. And which is the highest position you can get in the military.
Okay.
All right. And if you listen to the Air Force One tapes, his aide de camp, I think his name is Dorman, calls him 3 times and asks him, you know, where are you and where are you coming in at? He never replies. And then he went to the wrong airport. He was supposed to come in at Andrews. He ended up going to National Airport. I believe he did that because he knew there would be too many cameras recording his arrival at Andrews. All right. So I believe that's second stage. And then I believe that.
Wait. So you think that the second stage is Curtis LeMay?
No. I think it's the control of the autopsy.
Okay. So this
and
whole
there
thing.
is a witness who puts LeMay at the autopsy. All right. Okay. And that's why I believe that neither wound was dissected. All right. All right. Then I think the third stage is that when Oswald survived the Texas Theater, I believe that he was meant to be shot there. Okay. When he survived the Texas Theater.
What is the Texas Theater?
That's where he was arrested at.
Oh, okay.
Oswald was arrested at the Texas Theater.
Okay.
All right. And he survived and for 2 days. And I believe that they thought he was going to talk. And that's when they called in they called somebody like Trafficante, okay, the Florida Don, and said, can you help us out? We got to get rid of this guy. And then Trafficante calls somebody like Lewis McWillie. Lewis McWillie knew Ruby. In fact, Ruby adored Lewis.
Who was that person?
Lewis McWillie.
What was he doing? Working for the mob?
Yeah, he worked for Trafficante in Cuba.
Okay. In Cuba.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. And so Ruby actually sent McWillie a pistol. Okay. Well, he actually mailed him a pistol in Cuba. All right. And so they were, and one girlfriend of Ruby said that, you know, Jack would have done anything for Lewis McWillie. Okay. So then I think that's what happened, that they got him to go into the basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters and see. But
they were actors, though. They were not the ones who were taking the decision. Do you think?
What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, Ruby and all these guys, they were just executing orders. That's my feeling.
Yes, yeah. I agree
who was
with that.
giving the orders?
Well, in the film, in JFK Revisited, we pointed the finger at Alan Dulles. Okay, now I don't know that for sure. Okay, but this is, I think, a pretty good working hypothesis.
And what would be his motive?
Well, there's at least 2 or 3. One would be that it would be revenge for ruining his career. Okay, because Kennedy terminated him after the Bay of Pigs investigation. And second, Dulles had very many disputes with Kennedy over policy. Alan Dulles was kind of present at the creation, him and his brother, John Foster Dulles, the beginning of the Cold War. Okay. And they wanted this thing to continue. And Kennedy didn't. Okay. You know, and they had disputes over Cuba. They had disputes over Africa, the Congo, Patrice Lumumba. They had disputes over the French generals trying to overthrow de Gaulle in Paris.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. And so these things got very, very heated, to say the least. You know, Alan Dulles reportedly said once when he was writing a review for Harper's, you know, that Kennedy, he thought he was a god, you know. Well, I don't think so, Alan. He just thought he was president. Okay.
Yeah, he was doing his job, basically. And I want, before we wrap up, I want to, well, do you want to add something, Paul? Because I'm going to switch to public's questions. So if some people want to put the questions in the chat, there are already a lot of them. But Paul, if you want to add something.
Well, very quickly, Alan Dulles, there's a great book written about him called The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot. And that will give you a pretty good reason to see him as a person of extreme interest. The other point is you can't say the CIA killed Kennedy directly if Alan Dulles is calling the shots here, because he was fired. He was no longer part of the CIA.
At that moment in 1963.
At that moment. However, and this is the key point, is if you look at the people that were still influenced by Alan Dulles, you had people like David Atlee Phillips and William Harvey, who are persons of interest. And the reason I
were working for the CIA?
Well, they were with the CIA, but they were really known for regime change operations. Okay, so if you see the Kennedy assassination as a regime change operation, you'll find a lot of the fingerprints of the way they behaved when they removed Arbenz from Guatemala, and it was the same people, or when they tried to remove Castro, from Cuba. So the whole idea with these regime change operations is to find cutouts, either the mafia or Cuban exiles, or you name it, and then to also be able to blame the assassination on your opponent. Okay, that's why Oswald was meeting up with Castro agents and so on and so forth. So I think within there you have persons of interest that have been identified. And you're right, there are many levels to the assassination. There's what happened on the ground, like who fired the shots. Then you have more of a managerial level, like who came up with the strategy. But then you have another level above that, is who gave consent to this?
Yeah, and that's the scary question.
Now you get into a gray area, and there's not that many elements of proof. There are some things that we can see there that are very suspicious, but right. I think that's why we feel that this case will be solved to a large degree, but I don't think it'll ever be solved fully, like with the names and who made what phone call at what time.
Yeah, we'll never know probably everything. And it's been a long time too. So a lot of people are no longer with us. But I feel like there's so much mystery around that, even 60 years later. And that's why I guess it fascinates us. Okay, so I was doing the advertisement of this conversation we had today, and a lot of people came on my X platform or Facebook, and even today in the chat, a lot of people are talking about the implication of the Jewish mafia. I've never heard of that. Are you familiar with this topic? Do you know why people say that? Like Israel and all that?
Well, that Jack Ruby's name was Jack Rubenstein.
Okay, so he was a Jewish.
He was Jewish, and one of the mafiosi in Cuba was Mayor Lansky, and sometimes he's seen as someone who may have been involved to a certain degree, but it's largely overblown, in my opinion. Maybe Jim disagrees with him. I think you'll find more Italian names. Sorry, Jim, I think your name's Italian. You're going to find more Italian names and more, you'll find French names. You'll find...
Yeah. So in your opinion, there is no direct connection?
No. Now, mind you, the other reason they think of that is because Kennedy, was interfering with, not interfering, but he was objecting to Israel's attempt to get nuclear technology.
Yeah, that's what I just saw in the chat.
Yeah, no, but look, put it this way: that type of motive, you have 100 other.
Exactly. Right. There could be a lot of motives.
There are many different motives. The steel industry, the oil industry, the banking,
there was a lot of reasons not to like Kennedy.
Pick your point. So you can't take one foreign countries say, well, they had this interest, and so I don't buy that. But I don't know, Jim, if you agree with me or.
Do you have an opinion?
Well,
on
no,
that,
no.
Jim?
I think Paul did a good job on that.
I think that was a great answer too. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I really can't add very much.
No, there's nothing left to say. I think that's a good answer, because when you read about that, there is a lot of motives, and of course, you understand that he had a lot of enemies. So there was a lot of reasons to want him dead, I guess. But there's something to want him dead. There's another thing to be able to put together such a plot in order to have him executed in broad daylight in front of so many people. I mean, this is where it feels like you need to have a lot of power to be able to accomplish something like that. And even 60 years later, we can't really have the truth on this. So the cover-up shows that the people who did it are very powerful people.
Well, yeah, exactly. And you have to ask yourself these questions. Okay, take the Mossad. Okay, what links does the Mossad have with Cuban exiles that are in and around Oswald? What links do they have with controlling an autopsy? You know what I mean? So
right.
when you get into that sort of stuff, you just reach a dead end.
True that. Thanks for your time, gentlemen. Jim, I think you are going on Fox News today. Have you already?
I already did it.
Oh, so you had to wake up early this morning.
Try 5 o'clock.
Oh my gosh. Well, thanks for joining us today. It was very interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading your book in French, because I prefer reading in French. So I'll stay in touch with you, and thanks for your hard work. I think it's important that you haven't wasted 30 years of your life, Jim. Thank you.
I'm glad you think so.
Yeah, I do. Have a good one, guys.
All right.
Thank you,
you.
Eloise.
Bye.
Bye.